In 1938, a man entered Carl Jung's office with a mind tormented by suspicion. He was utterly convinced that everyone around him was deceitful, conniving, and manipulative. His wife had walked out on him, his co-workers kept their distance, and even his students appeared wary of him. Despite all this, the man believed he alone held the moral high ground, a solitary beacon of integrity in a world full of liars. Jung listened quietly, then said something that shook the man to his core. You're not witnessing their darkness. You're witnessing your own. What Jung described as shadow projection is among the most insidious psychological traps we can fall into. It's a condition made even more dangerous by one simple truth. The person projecting is utterly convinced of their own accuracy, but understanding this dynamic changes everything. The moment you recognize the pattern of projection, you unlock one of the most profound psychological defenses available. If you've ever felt wrongly accused, someone was certain about your motives, yet their assumption was completely off the mark, then you've encountered shadow projection firsthand. That jarring sense of disconnect isn't in your head, it's real. The man in Jung's office, let's call him Friedrich, wasn't just any patient. He was a respected philosophy professor, published and celebrated for his moral clarity. But despite his intellectual achievements, his personal life had collapsed. Everyone betrays me, he confided. My assistant is stealing from me. My wife left because she's selfish. My peers sabotage me. I'm surrounded by manipulators. Jung asked just one question. What's the common thread among all these people? Friedrich didn't skip a beat. They're all dishonest, self-serving. And what's the one constant in each of these situations? Jung followed. There was a pause. Then, defensively, Friedrich asked, "Are you suggesting this is my fault? I'm saying you are the common denominator." 3 months later, Friedrich suffered a total breakdown. He was hospitalized, unable to function, not because Jung had broken him, but because Jung had shown him the mechanism of his shadow projection. And once you see it, it can tear apart the reality you thought you knew. But, and this is essential, Friedrich's collapse wasn't the problem. The projection was, the breakdown marked the beginning of his healing, not the end. Shadow projection works like this. When you're unable to accept certain qualities in yourself, ambition, manipulation, selfishness, your mind doesn't eliminate them. It simply buries them. But those qualities don't vanish. Instead, they gather force in your unconscious mind. And since you've rejected seeing them in yourself, your brain begins to detect them everywhere else. Your brain, far from being broken, is performing exactly as it evolved, to it's just operating with faulty inputs. Research by Dr. Roy Baumeister has revealed that individuals who frequently project exhibit lower activity in the brain regions responsible for self-reflection. They're literally neurologically impaired in seeing their own behavior clearly. To make matters more complex, our mirror neurons, the neural systems that allow us to feel into others' experiences, contribute to the confusion. These neurons simulate the behavior and emotional states of those around us by internally mimicking them. So when someone appears even remotely ambitious or strategic, and those are traits you've rejected in yourself, your brain generates a false alarm. It's not them you're feeling, it's you. But your conscious mind is unaware, so the manipulation you detect feels absolutely real. This phenomenon is what experts call projection blindness. The more you engage in projection, the harder it becomes to see that you're doing it. And most of us have felt the other side of this. When someone accuses you of actions or motives that feel alien to your core, their certainty can feel completely unhinged, almost maddening. That's because you're not being seen. You're being used as a canvas for someone else's disowned parts. Here's the powerful reframe. Friedrich didn't suffer from an overactive imagination. He had a gift for pattern recognition. His sensitivity wasn't a flaw, it was an untapped strength. The issue was that he hadn't yet learned to distinguish between projection and true perception. If you can make that distinction, the very same quality that once caused chaos can become a superpower. Nietzsche wrote passionately about the resentment of others, condemning it as a moral failing. Yet his writings are filled with his own bitterness, especially toward those who didn't validate his genius. He too was projecting, blind to his inner turmoil. Near the end of his life, this unresolved conflict contributed to his psychological breakdown. But had he confronted his projections, his insights might have advanced psychology by decades. It's vital to understand that projection once served a purpose. In our evolutionary past, seeing potential threats, even if they weren't real, was safer than missing danger. Our brains were wired to err on the side of caution. But in the modern world, this tendency becomes corrosive. Chronic projection ruins relationships, erodes trust, and destroys mental health. The new evolutionary edge belongs to those who can integrate their shadow. That means retaining your ability to detect threats, but shedding the false positives. You become someone who perceives danger when it's actually there, not someone who sees it everywhere. By the 4th month of Friedrich's treatment, Jung introduced a pivotal insight. Your brain isn't malfunctioning, he said. It's simply following its evolutionary programming with the wrong inputs. Here's how it works. Every quality you entirely disown, whether it's manipulation, ambition, or selfishness, gets logged by your brain as a threat signal. So when you encounter someone who even remotely exhibits that quality, your brain shouts, "Danger." But the source of the alarm isn't truly them. It's your own reaction to the part of yourself you've buried. This creates what Jung called the projection circuit, a mental loop where rejected traits become externalized as threats. You've likely experienced this. Someone performs an ordinary action. Maybe they ask a probing question or make a strategic suggestion, but suddenly you're certain they're scheming, selfish, or malicious. That certainty feels like truth. But what you're actually reacting to is your own shadow being triggered. Dr. Giacomo Rizzolatti's research on mirror neurons explains the mechanism. When you witness someone doing something, your brain first simulates the action internally. You don't just observe ambition or calculation, you feel it. But if those are traits you've deemed unacceptable, your brain immediately misattributes them to the other person. What you think is reading people is often just reading yourself, your disowned self. Another layer to this is how the brain constructs emotion. Based on past experience, your mind doesn't just passively feel emotions, it predicts them. So if you've learned, for example, that ambition equals threat, your brain will automatically project ambitious motives onto others, even if no evidence exists. This results in projection loops, self-reinforcing patterns, where your predictions shape your perceptions, which then seem to confirm your predictions. But here's the liberating part. You can interrupt these loops. Jung taught Friedrich to notice the physical cues that arise during projection. For instance, when Friedrich accused his assistant of stealing his ideas, Jung asked, "What do you feel in your body right now?" Friedrich noticed tightness in his chest, tension in his jaw, and a rush of defensive thoughts. Jung then posed the key question: are you feeling your assistant's manipulation or your own disowned strategic thinking? That question broke through Friedrich's mental fog. The manipulation he sensed wasn't coming from his assistant. It was his own strategic mind, an aspect he'd long rejected as morally wrong, surfacing through projection. This leads to one of the most powerful tools in recognizing projection, the body scan method. When you feel moral outrage or certainty about someone else's supposed flaws, stop and scan your body. Where's the tension? What's the feeling? What's the impulse? Fight, flee, argue, judge? Then ask, could this be a trait I've disowned in myself? Here's the key distinction Friedrich learned. Projection feels like moral outrage, righteous, hot, urgent, accurate perception. On the other hand, feels grounded, calm, curious, and practical. Once Friedrich began practicing this, the results were staggering. 90% of what I believed was deep insight into others, he admitted, was actually me projecting my shadow. Only about 10% was rooted in actual observation. And if you reflect on your own experiences, you might find a similar ratio. To dismantle this tendency, Friedrich developed a daily routine. Every time he felt judgment arise, he paused and asked himself 3 essential questions. What's the actual evidence? What else could explain this behavior? Do I do this myself? For example, when his assistant asked detailed questions about his research methods, Friedrich's knee-jerk reaction was, "He's trying to steal my intellectual property." But then he examined the situation more closely. What was the evidence? Just questioned. What else could be going on? Maybe the assistant was genuinely curious and eager to learn. Do I do this? Yes. Friedrich realized he'd often studied his peers' methods to improve his own work. In that moment, the projection unraveled. What he had perceived as theft was simply a mirror of his own strategic behavior, now viewed through a lens of suspicion. So, what quality do you find yourself judging harshly in others? Is it arrogance, manipulation, laziness, selfishness? Naming it is the first step toward breaking its unconscious grip over you. But recognition alone isn't enough. True transformation comes from integration, the act of reclaiming your shadow. By month 8, Friedrich asked Jung the question that would change everything. If I'm projecting onto everyone around me, how do I stop? Jung's reply was profound. You don't stop it. You reclaim it. You name it. This was the essence of what Jung called active shadow reclamation. Many think shadow work simply means admitting to having negative traits, but that's just the beginning. Real integration means developing a dialogue with your shadow as if it were its own person. During one of their sessions, Jung led Friedrich through an exercise. Close your eyes, he instructed. Picture a figure who embodies the quality you most often see in others. Let it speak. What Friedrich saw shocked him. He met a character he came to call the strategist. He asked this figure, "Why are you here?" The response came quickly. "I've been trying to help you succeed, but you called me evil, so I worked from the shadows." "Your manipulation," Friedrich said. "You're what I hate." "No," the figure replied. "I'm strategy. I'm ambition. You rejected me, so I went underground, but I never left. If you acknowledge me, I can serve you ethically." This internal conversation stunned Friedrich. He'd spent years vilifying traits that could have actually served him if brought into consciousness. His fear was, if I accept this part of myself, won't I become manipulative? The shadow replied with clarity. "Unconscious. I control you. You manipulate while denying it. Conscious. You get to choose how and when to use me ethically." That was the turning point. Over the following months, Friedrich continued the dialogue with his shadow. He realized that these dark traits weren't inherently evil. They were parts of him trying to meet valid needs: success, protection, recognition. Because he'd disowned them, they had no choice but to act from the shadows. But when integrated, they became conscious tools, and this is true for all of us. The qualities we find most intolerable in others are often the very strengths we've exiled in ourselves. You can try it right now. Close your eyes and think of the trait that triggers you most in other people. Picture a character who embodies that trait. What does it look like? What would it say if you let it speak? This is the essence of Jungian integration. Jung did this work himself. For years, he projected power, hunger, and egotism onto Freud, which ultimately destroyed their relationship. But after Jung did his own shadow integration, he was finally able to admit to his own ambition. That acknowledgement didn't diminish him. It empowered him. He went on to found his own school of psychology and revolutionized the field. Modern research backs this process, writing about internal conflict. Externalizing it through narrative leads to reduced stress hormones, improved immune function, and increased self-awareness. By giving voice to the unconscious, you build bridges between your inner world and your conscious choices. Friedrich adopted a consistent practice. Every time he noticed projection, he named it, he identified the feeling, traced the pattern, and looked for when he'd displayed similar behavior. Then he carefully distinguished between what he was projecting and what the other person was actually doing. In just 6 months, this practice reduced his projections by 90%. And it didn't just transform him, it reshaped his relationships. Sarah, a CEO in the tech industry, constantly accused her team of being too political. She prided herself on being a mission-first leader, someone above office games. But through shadow work, she discovered she was actually highly political, just unconsciously so. She timed her announcements, calculated board meetings, and carefully curated her image. Once she owned that side of herself, her leadership changed. She became transparent about her strategies. Her team relaxed, trust improved. Within a year, team performance increased by 40%, and turnover dropped by 60%. When you stop projecting, the people around you stop walking on eggshells. They stop being the unwilling carriers of your repressed darkness. They finally feel safe. Once you reach the point where you can see your shadow without shame, something remarkable happens. You no longer need to pretend you're free of flaws. You know you're capable of selfishness, manipulation, even dishonesty. But you consciously choose not to act from those places. That is real power. Jung called this transformation becoming whole, not perfect, not pure, whole. When Friedrich reached this stage, he asked a new question. How do I find others who've done this work? He told Jung, I can't exactly walk around asking, hey, are you psychologically integrated? Jung smiled and replied, you don't need to ask, you observe. Integration has signals. Learn to spot them. Jung taught him what we now call the integration detection system. 3 subtle but powerful signals that reveal whether someone has integrated their shadow or is still projecting it. Signal 1, how they speak. Integrated individuals speak in shades of gray. You'll hear them say things like, I'm working on this, or I can be reactive when stressed. They acknowledge their complexity. Projectors, by contrast, speak in absolutes. I never do that. I always handle things well. I'm not the kind of person who gets emotional. They distance themselves from any sign of weakness. Try this. Share something vulnerable with someone. Notice how they respond. An integrated person might nod and share something of their own. A projector might subtly correct you or elevate themselves. Signal 2, how they receive feedback. Integrated people respond with curiosity. Tell me more. What did you notice? That's helpful. I'll reflect on it. They're open to discovering their blind spots. Projectors, they get defensive fast. That's not true. You misunderstood. Or worse, they flip it back on you. Even gentle feedback causes them to shut down or lash out. Try offering someone minor feedback. Observe if they reflect or react. Signal 3, how they handle uncertainty. Integrated individuals tolerate ambiguity. I'm not sure what that meant. There could be multiple explanations. Let's wait and see. Projectors crave certainty. I know exactly what they were trying to do. It's obvious they were being shady. They assign meaning quickly and rigidly. Ask someone what they think about a vague situation. Integrated people give you options. Projectors give you judgment. These three signals: language, feedback response, and comfort with ambiguity tell you almost everything. Integrated people feel safe to be around. You can relax, be yourself, and speak honestly. Projectors feel dangerous, even if they're not overtly hostile. You're constantly managing how you're perceived. Friedrich used these signals to reshape his entire social circle. He pulled away from those showing zero signals, maintained healthy distance from those with one or two, and formed deep bonds with people showing all three. He discovered that his life became dramatically less chaotic, not because difficult people disappeared, but because he stopped being drawn to projectors and stopped projecting himself. In professional settings, this skill is transformative. Teams composed of integrated individuals tend to be high-performing, creative, and resilient. They allow for disagreement without breakdown, innovation without ego, and progress without political maneuvering. In contrast, teams dominated by projectors become toxic, fast defensive communication, blame games, and stagnation. Research by Dr. Amy Edmondson has shown that the key to high-performing teams is psychological safety. And psychological safety thrives when people have integrated their shadows, when they don't need to pretend or protect a fragile self-image. But what do you do when you encounter a chronic projector, someone showing none of the three signals? Use the gray rock method. Be polite but dull. Avoid sharing vulnerabilities. Don't justify yourself. Don't try to correct their perceptions. Just stay neutral. This reduces your chances of becoming their next projection target. If you're dealing with semi-integrated people, those showing one or two signals, go slowly. Share in layers. Set boundaries. Observe over time. But when you find highly integrated people, lean in. Build with them. Trust them. These are your people. They don't demand perfection. They offer presence. Friedrich began to attract relationships filled with mutual respect, authenticity, and clarity. His old patterns faded, not because the world changed, but because he did. Then came the final stage. Month 16. Friedrich returned to Jung with a revelation. "I'm not cursed with seeing manipulation everywhere," he said. "I'm gifted with detecting strategic patterns. I just didn't know how to separate theirs from mine. Now that I've integrated my own ambition, I can actually see clearly." Jung smiled. "That," he said, "is integrated perception. The ability to distinguish your projections from actual traits in others. You don't lose your sensitivity. You refine it. What once overwhelmed you now informs you. Your former curse becomes your social intelligence." 3 years later, Friedrich had rebuilt everything. He was publishing impactful work, promoted to department chair, leading with collaboration, reconnected with his children, remarried. And perhaps most importantly, he was free. Free to feel, to see, to lead. Not because his shadow was gone, but because it was no longer in control. So wherever you are, whether you're just noticing projections, or you're deep in shadow dialogue, or you're refining the final stages, remember this: your sensitivity is not your weakness. It's your superpower once integrated. And if you found yourself in Friedrich's journey, let it be a mirror, a guide, a path, because the most dangerous sign in a person isn't their flaw, it's their unconsciousness of it. But when that unconsciousness is made conscious, it transforms from burden to brilliance, from confusion to clarity, from fear to freedom.